All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, today's Work Life Rocks virtual series is subtitled Everyday Practices for Justice. I want to start off and say that I'm really happy to be invited to participate in this series, Work Life Rocks for Resilience, Optimism, Compassion, Knowledge, and Self-Care. When I was approached, I said, I really want to talk about justice in its everyday form. Because so much of what our office does is rooted in this idea of daily work. When we're thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, we don't think of it as a one and done training series. We think of it as a lifelong journey. So I wanted to situate some of those ideas in today's talk. I have three objectives for today. I want to give you an overview of my office, which is relatively new. We were created in 2019, November 2019, when I stepped into the role as director. So I want to talk to you about how our office was built, what grounds our work. And then I want to talk about some of the frequently encountered scenarios that we engage people around, specifically when it comes to everyday practices of justice, everyday practices that lead us and help us get stronger in the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then what that will look like or could look like for you in your daily practices. So starting off with an overview of our office. So the acronym is IEDE because we love acronyms at the University of Kentucky. And the full name for our office is Inclusive Excellence in Diversity Education. And the work out of our office is guided by three pillars: language, history, and practice. We orient all of the work that we do in our office around these three ideas. And every attendee to one of our programs or one of our trainings can expect to be engaged in learning around one of these ideas: language, history, or practice. And I'm going to give a breakdown of what each of those ideas looks like, how it connects to our work. But I just wanted to start here with a broad overview. So let's talk about this idea of language. Social justice educator Adrienne Marie Brown writes in her fantastic book on facilitation. Her book's called Emergent Strategy. She says, quote, "There is a conversation in the room that only these people at this moment can have. Find it," end quote. And I think this is a helpful way of orienting around this idea of language, because one of the things that I noticed since I came to the University of Kentucky and when I started doing, getting really more involved in diversity, equity, inclusion work is that we are using these words that have a lot of different meanings for a lot of people. So part of the reason why we focus on language in IEDE is because we want to create common language, a common vocabulary around bias and discrimination, so that it better ensures that our campus community has shared meaning and overall awareness. And the example that I like to share is that if one person thinks that racism is a cross burning, and another person, like I'm going to use myself as an example, if I think of racism as somebody touching my hair, which has happened to me before by a dentist, both are included under this huge umbrella of racism. But if we're not aware of the wide spectrum of the meaning of this word, racism, and I'll talk more about that later today, then we can't begin to have a shared conversation. So we need a really strong understanding of what words mean and how we are using them so that we can even do the work of beginning to have conversations. So that's one of the reasons why language is really important. Language is also the orienting idea for our unconscious bias initiative. Unconscious bias is an initiative that has been on campus since 2016. We've done a couple of updates to that initiative since I stepped into my role as director. And one of those updates is to situate language as a tool that we can use to begin addressing, becoming more aware of, and intervening with acts of bias. So there's a conversation that needs to be had. Only these people can have it in this moment. And our philosophy out of IEDE is that we got to make sure that we have a shared understanding of the language that we use when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion work. I like to turn to James Baldwin, who's just phenomenal intellectual thinker, writer, and somebody I often return to meditate on when I think about how I want to do my work well. And James Baldwin says, quote, "I am what time, circumstance, history have made of me, certainly, but I am more than that. So are we all." And I think this is end quote. And I think this is a wonderful orientation, a way of understanding how we situate history in the work of IEDE. Part of the reason why we focus on history is to draw attention to patterns of behavior or occurrence and to offer a relational account of significant events. So one of the things that you hear people talk about, you hear it in casual conversation, you hear it in public discourse in the media, is we want to, oh, why are we experiencing this now? Didn't that happen so long ago? And what I love about this quotation from James Baldwin is he is so lovingly reminding us and so poignantly reminding us that we are living, breathing history. You are, I am, we are all together. We are alive now in the present, but because we are alive, because we carry history with us, that history is also living too. And I think that's important to remember. So when we keep encountering this difficulty, these challenges in progressing in our diversity, equity, inclusion work, it's because I think there's this strong desire to move away and move past, but we can't move past something that is very present. So part of the reason why we situate history in what we do is we want to contextualize the moment that we are living in. We want to contextualize the language that we use. We want to create a space where the things that we talk about are as connected to the past and in ways that will help us understand to what we are doing now being so intimately tied to what is to come. And then finally, returning back to Adrienne Marie Brown, you will find that we in our office, we turn to her work a lot and her philosophies. Adrienne Marie Brown says later in her book, quote, "This is a time travel exercise for the heart. This is collaborative ideation. What are the ideas that will liberate all of us?" End quote. The rest of this quotation, this idea of collaborative ideation comes out of this idea that, Adrienne Marie Brown says we have to imagine new worlds so that we don't rely on these stereotyped ideas of who people are. And what that suggests to us is that we are really well conditioned to interact with one another based off of these simplified, incorrect ideas of people and how they are marked, how they are identified. And in order to get past this really well conditioned way of interacting with one another, we have to go to the limits of our imagination and beyond. And we can't do that by ourselves. We have to come together. We often say in our office, this is people work, this is community work. This is how we are going, this idea of diversity, equity, inclusion is really about how we are going to show up together in community. And in coming together, what are the ideas? What are the practices? What are the things that we need to do so that all of us can be free to be who we are, can be free to live full, healthy, productive, valued lives. So all of our work is moving towards this idea of practice. We gotta build our muscles to be able to get to this idea of ideas of liberation, right? So we focus on practice because we are trying to create spaces for sustained behavioral shifts, so that people who attend our sessions can then take those tools and then use them in their circles of influence. So we have to practice coming together and sitting with and navigating discomfort. We have to practice coming together to call out systems of power and systems of oppression. We're not used to doing it. There's a reason why we're not used to doing it. So we got to come together and practice to build those muscles. So that's an overview of our office. I want to talk about some frequently encountered scenarios that we often spend time wrestling with and helping people to unpack. The first scenario, and these are all put in quotations, part of another reason why we focus on language is because often what we're engaging with and what we're trying to interrupt is the way people use words and like what they mean when they use them. And the first scenario that I want to talk about is that's blank. And you can fill in that blank any way you want to. That's racist, that's sexist, that's homophobic. And what I've noticed over the past few years is that folks, as they're beginning to learn to navigate language related to diversity, equity, inclusion, they start to name what they see and using the most simplified explanation of it. And it's not that this explanation is incorrect. It very well may be racist, sexist, homophobic. But it's language that's naming a system that's been in operation for hundreds of years. It's naming a system that is enormous and a system that moves in ways that people think is normal and it's just supposed to be that way. And in doing that, people are often apt to dismiss what you're naming and calling out. And so what we like to offer is that saying that's whatever is not the call to action that you think it is. I think one of the things that people in diversity, equity, inclusion work need to get stronger at is doing work around learning language to name the problem in its specificity. So not just saying that's sexist, but what you said or did is rooted in patterns of policies or patterns of behavior that unfairly or prejudicially impact women. It's like, well, that's way more wordy than just saying that's sexist. Yes, it is. But when we can get to the specificity, that's when we can start doing the work to interrupt it, to interrupt that system in operation, that system that unfairly targets or unfairly negatively impacts women. That's an example. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about cancel culture in this context. And definition for canceling or cancel culture refers to the process of withdrawing support from others due to their objectionable or offensive behavior. Cancel culture has been taken up in the last few years around movements that are seeking to bring accountability to oppressive or violent behavior, including sexual assault, transphobia, and racism. Cancel culture has drawn criticism for what some believe to be an extreme method of accountability that doesn't leave room for education or redress. And cancel culture is also receiving criticism as a practice that appears to focus more on the abuser, the offender, and less on healing the person who has been negatively impacted or harmed. One of the books that our office distributes a quarterly newsletter, and we recently sent it out a couple of weeks ago for May. We'll do it again in August. But in our May newsletter, I listed I came up with my summer reading challenge. And one of the books that I'm reading is We Will Not Cancel Us by Adrienne Brown. I tell you, her name keeps coming up and it will continue to keep coming up. But I do want to spend some more time reflecting on this idea of canceling, the limits of canceling, when canceling is most productive. And I want to encourage you all to maybe join. We can just have an informal book club. I want to talk about it on our social media channels and see if we can't learn something new together. Another encounter scenario that we field a lot is, I'm really tired of talking about fill in the blank, whatever it is, whatever social justice issue that folks are feeling exhaustion from. And what we've noticed is that these phrases are often rooted in one of two ideas: exhaustion, like just general, I don't have any energy left to try to do this work that seems to be impossible, or defensiveness. I feel called out every single time this comes up, and I'm done, I'm out. So I want to offer this. I want to talk about this idea of burnout. I think burnout from defensiveness, or burnout from just general exhaustion. And I want to just offer this gentle reminder, especially if it's coming from a place of defensiveness. The ability to step away from DEI related discussions is a privilege. Be able to step back and step away, especially if you're somebody who occupies what we call a dominant social identity, and a social identity that is privileged or favored in our social constructs and our social norms. And at the same time, this work is hard. So I just want to encourage everyone who's feeling burnt out, if you recognize that stepping away is a privilege, and also when you need to step away, do so that you can come back and continue to do the work. Don't step away for too long, because there are people out there who need you to step in and step up. And then there are some people who are tired of talking about things because they want to do something. Talking has its limits, right? And to you all, I want to encourage you in this way. Public opinion always follows the movement, right? And I like to think of Black Lives Matter as an example. When it was first said, forgive me for forgetting the dates wrong, and think Black Lives Matter as a movement, as a statement, began in 2013. And back in 2013, nobody wanted to say it, right? And I look at my little tiny block, and of the 6 houses on that block, 4 of them have Black Lives Matter signs in the front yard. So I just want to say, the movement, you have to move in the direction of diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and then the public opinion will follow. So start daily. I know it seems like a long road, but I am encouraged, just based off of history, based off of patterns, that your movement forward may feel like a lonely movement forward, but public opinion will follow if you and I and all of us take that first step forward. Another common scenario that we encounter is this question: what if I mess up? Like, I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to cause harm. I really want to get it right. This move towards, I just want to first remind you that this move towards perfection and getting right is part of this larger system of oppression. Oppression wants us to be perfect. Oppression doesn't allow for mistakes. And so to this question, what if I mess up? I just want to say, you will, and it will be okay. We are engaged in a process of unlearning. We are unlearning what we have learned. And I would be hard pressed to find anybody who learned something and then were able to execute it perfectly and consistently from the second that they learned. If you're one of those people, I mean, brava, kudos to you. So I say this simply to offer a gentle reminder that it's okay to mess up. Just be prepared to accept it, and know how you're going to incorporate corrective action so that you don't repeat the mistake again. That's the goal. Don't mess up. Don't continue to mess up. Take the lesson, incorporate new behaviors, new practices, new ideas, new whatever you need to, so that way you don't make the same mistake again. All right. Just to wrap up here, I want to offer you 6, I guess, tips. I don't know if they're tips, but 6 tips for doing anti-work, continuing to do and practice the type of behaviors that need to be continued in order to realize or actualize the type of justice that we're seeking, or that I'm assuming you're all seeking since you are here. So tip 1, Listen and pay attention to where you feel resistant. Um, I always, we like to say, it was my colleague Brittany who said this. She said, feelings are information. And so pay attention to when you encounter something that makes you bristle or makes you feel alive or emboldened or whatever. Any emotional that response that you hear to information that you receive related to diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, access, pay attention to that. Ask yourself why. Answer that question. And you will know more after you answer it. Promise, every single time. I feel this way. Why do I feel this way? Answer that question, and you will know more about yourself, and you will know more about what you want to do and need to do. My tip number 2 is to focus on the impact and not the intent. Focusing, when we are doing diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, access work, we are always focused on the impact, not on the intent. Focusing on the intent leaves you less likely, not unlikely, but less likely to acknowledge when harm has been done. When you focus on the intent, you're operating from a place that's going to activate defensiveness instead of accountability. We cannot be accountable when we are operating from a defensive stance. When you're focusing on your impact, you're saying you are opening up a space for you to make adjustments, for you to receive feedback, for you to act differently. Tip number 3 is recognize the limits of your knowledge. You only know what you know until you know something different. And if you hear someone say something and you find yourself responding, well, I didn't know that, or that's not true for me. Again, ask yourself, why? Why don't you know that? Why is that not true? Investigate. After you investigate and you can respond to that question of why, you will know more about yourself, about others, about the world. Tip number 4, take seriously the idea that there are many capital T truths and that there are many truths to hold. And again, asking questions to get more information. We say this a lot. Questions are our friends. Ask yourself, why is my truth considered supreme? Why is my truth considered best? Why is my truth considered truer than someone else's? Investigate, and you will know more after. The thing about diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, access work is that there are no easy answers. Nothing about this work can or should be simple or simplified. And I firmly believe that we miss out on the beauty of our humanity when we can't let ourselves get a little bit messy. And this idea of many truths, that's messy. But I think that if we don't at least entertain the idea of mess, then we're not doing the actual work. Tip number 5, because I already told you you're going to mess up, so I just need you to accept this as something you should hold dear to you and own your mistakes when you inevitably make them. Again, get really good at apologies. Sometimes I'm sorry is enough. Sometimes I'm sorry needs to be followed with, I understand why this was hurtful or harmful. Here's what I plan to do to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Both can be helpful, and you just kind of have to fill out the situation to know which one will be most helpful in that particular moment. But if you get called out on something, if somebody says, hey, what you did hurt, say I'm sorry, and then maybe to help it go down a little more easily, just say, wow, that person just helped me out so that I can show up and do better. And then finally, process your feelings when you mess up, but not with the people who are involved. So those who are most impacted and most harmed are often left to do the work of educating others, which is energetically draining. And then when people feel bad, they often have to do the work of helping that person not to feel bad anymore, which is another type of harm, which is another type of energetic drain. So offer your apology, offer your statement of, correction. And then, but to feel better about it, you got to go to somebody else, not the person who was harmed, because when you do that, you're putting more work on them. And that is not moving in line with what we consider to be best practices for diversity, equity, inclusion, access, justice work. Okay. And I think that is all I have for you today. I want to thank you for your time. I'm happy to stay after for those who are here in attendance to answer questions.